All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a fantastic webinar ahead of us looking at our new payment rating, which is just over a month old now. Went live, I think it was the 30th of June, 1st of July. So for those of you who are CreditorWatch customers and utilize that, hopefully you've had an opportunity to have a play with it, order some, see some, interact with it. For those of you new to CreditorWatch or potentially considering CreditorWatch, welcome. Looking forward to getting into today's webinar. We've got a great speaker guest joining us in James O'Donnell, who I will introduce very soon. As always, CreditorWatch, a little bit about the company, an end-to-end credit management solution. So if you are offering any sort of terms credit, whether it's trade, finance, etc., to debtors, to customers, then we've got a solution or a range of solutions for you, from customer onboarding using an online credit application. Welcome to the 21st century. Move away from paper-based or PDFs. We can have a live and interactive online credit application for you and for your customers to apply with. And then that leads into our whole due diligence process: credit reporting, scoring, risk assessment, due diligence. We've got everything that you need, all the way through to ongoing monitoring, alerts, and portfolio management, allowing you to analyze your portfolio, find out those companies that you're dealing with or those customers that you're dealing with that you should probably stop dealing with, but also those that potentially you can look at increasing their credit limit, which is a great thing to do in times like this. Key highlights, love this slide, heaps of data, heaps of insights. We've got over 50,000 companies across Australia utilizing CreditorWatch. We're selling over 1 million reports a year now, and a huge amount of unique data coming into our bureau to give our users incredibly powerful insights. And also that data powers things like our risk score and also our payment rating, which James is going to speak about very soon. So a quick agenda here. Obviously, James is the star of the show today. We're very fortunate to have him. So James, I will get you to turn your camera on, and I want to welcome you to today's webinar. So thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome back for the second time. So great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. So quick agenda, CreditorWatch data. Obviously, we're talking about the payment rating today. So what is it? How has it been put together? Why is it important? And we'll do a bit of a demo on it as well. And of course, as always, please do ask questions as we go. We'll have a Q&A session at the end for those of you who want to ask questions. If we get really technical questions, James will come back to you in due time, but we should have some time for that at the end. As I said, we have James O'Donnell joining us today. He's the Director of Open Analytics, CreditorWatch partner, who is him and his company, I should say, Open Analytics, responsible for putting together the amazing risk score that we have in place that many of you would be familiar with and have probably joined us for webinars in the past on that. And of course, our new payment rating. He comes with a huge amount of experience and extensive knowledge in anything to do with decisioning, portfolio optimization, credit scoring, models, etc. He's working predominantly with Big Four banks, fintechs, those new lenders that we hear so much about in the media, and of course, the largest credit reporting bureau in Australia, which is CreditorWatch. So it's great to have James on board. Thank you for joining us today, James. And really, this is all about you, and I will let you take over, and everyone can strap themselves in. So thank you.
Great. So look, so hopefully it's a fairly brief presentation, because the payment rating is really intended to be quite a simple concept, which is hopefully quite easy for everyone to absorb and understand. It's there to complement the credit rating or the risk score. Before I dive into it, just taking a step back, looking at CreditorWatch's data. So CreditorWatch as a bureau and really a data service provider really has three families of data. So on the left there, we've got our trade payments and transactional data, so data sourced from customers on trade payments and turnover. In the middle there, business demographic information, so information about the business, things like our geographic risk measures, our industry and things like that. and then finally the more traditional sort of adverse sort of bureau information. So that's the sort of big picture of CreditorWatch's data. Now the payment rating really lives in that first section there, so the trade payments transactional data. And what it's intended to be really is a summary of businesses' recent payment behaviour, effectively. So we flick onto the next slide. Okay, so quite an important subtlety is CreditorWatch fundamentally has two pools of data. So number one is data sourced through accounting software integration. So data sourced directly from trade receivables, data sourced from Xero and MYOB. What characterizes that data, it tends to be the SME segment or smaller businesses. So we're talking sort of businesses sort of probably up to 50 mil turnover to 100 mil turnover type size businesses. So we've got a large volume of that data. The second data source is our age trial balance data. So data sourced from typically larger corporates, sourced directly from payment systems. So they're the data sources. We'll touch on towards the end that we make this distinction because we do see some quite different payment behaviors to the bigger versus the smaller companies.
And I'll just add in there as well, CreditorWatch is the only bureau that integrates with the likes of accounting software providers like Xero and MYOB, and we continue to invest heavily in that space. And we certainly will be looking to integrate with other providers outside of those main two as well in the coming months.
Yeah, that's correct. All right, so the payment rating. So look, the payment rating is designed to be something that you can quickly look at and easily understand what it's measuring. So it's based on an average arrears position over the last 12 months. So what we're doing is looking at both of those data sources and looking at all invoices, and we're looking at the average arrears position over the last 12 months. We take a dollar weighted average, so that simply means we will weight more towards a larger invoice versus a smaller one. Then it is a simple 5-point rating scale, so an A to E scale. So A is good, E is bad. If you're getting a C rating, that's sort of, you're basically within the sort of average sort of payment behavior of Aussie businesses. So in the A and B category, so to get an A, basically you're paying everything on time. B is basically you're paying everything within a week. Now, if you're in either an A or B category, you're within the top sort of 20% or so in terms of quote good payers. C, as I mentioned, was average. Once you get to those D or E categories, you're roundabout in the worst sort of 20% of payers. So D rating sort of 30 to 60 days arrears on average, and then E is quite bad at sort of 60 days. We have some constraints on, obviously, if we don't have trade payments data on a business, then you don't get a rating, but we have a condition that you need at least sort of 2 active trade lines or invoices over the last 12 months. So hopefully quite easy to understand. Yep.
Sorry, you keep going. You're right, keep going.
No, I'd finish my point there.
I was going to say, so that, that James is, pointing out something that's really important there is, if you're dealing with organizations that are an A, B, or C, and C in particular, I think there's a natural inclination to think, oh, C, that feels like a bit riskier. And the fact is that the majority of Australian businesses are falling into that C rating category. So certainly not to be scared away by those, but it really is a big step change when you go from that C to D or even an E in particular. You should definitely be avoiding D. We're suggesting you avoid them as well, or obviously keep right on top of credit limits and payment times, and or looking at things like 50% deposits or cash up front, that sort of thing. So yeah, important to note there that having the ability to run the credit report, see the credit rating, but also see the payment rating is a really powerful thing. And the last point that James was making there about the not rated, whereby we don't have enough payment history on a particular entity to provide a rating. Hopefully we also have an industry classification for that particular entity, and we're able to provide an industry average there as well.
Yeah.
The last thing I'll point out there, and a couple of the stats you'll see for D, for example, entity has high risk, high payment risk, and is among the worst 15 to 20% of payers nationally. And I know that James is going to get into some more stats here as we go along too.
Yeah, so the rating is, I guess, the quick assessment and quick view of a business, but within the credit reports, we're, typical of CreditorWatch, we're being quite transparent with all the detailed information as well. So we provide some information on industry comparisons. So we'll sort of compare each business to their industry average. We provide a bit of a history, so you can see the example there, screenshot from the tool. So we basically show their average arrears position going back 12 months. Then on the right there, we also show a bit of information on the data going into the assessment. So a key one there is the number of trade lines. So you'll see how many data points are contributing to each case in terms of their rating. So that's probably the key point there. On the next slide, this is quite an important point. So how do the payment ratings correlate to insolvency risk or defaults? So this chart here shows the average default or insolvency rate. Now we define a default as going under external administration, so a pretty serious credit event. So that's the vertical axis on that chart. Then we've got the payment ratings along the horizontal axis. Now what I've done here, and this is quite an important point, I've split regular businesses from those high turnover businesses on the right, you see there. So sort of starting with those smaller businesses, you can see sort of A and B rating a fairly low risk. C is around the average. So for context on this pool of businesses, the average default rate is about 4%. So C is pretty close to that average. The insolvency risk for small businesses really starts ratcheting up at that sort of D mark. And once you get to E sort of rating, more than 1 in 10 of those businesses that we're giving an E rating to, you wait 12 months and they'll be insolvent. Really important point around sort of high turnover businesses. See the same trend, but obviously pretty stark there that it's not as a strong correlation. We tend to see little difference for big companies up to sort of 30 days. So A, B, and C are pretty indistinguishable. D's and E's. Now, D's and E's, obviously the insolvency risk is higher, but it's a very different prospect, a large, let's say 100 mil turnover business with some late payments. Yes, they'll have an elevated default risk compared to a large business that is paying on time, but it'll still be lower insolvency risk compared to a small business that's paying on time. So in some sense, this is one of the motivations for creating this rating, in that there's definitely a phenomena out there. There are some larger companies, you'd probably be surprised, there's quite a large number of big corporates that can get that D rating. Now, if the risk score is a measure of insolvency risk, so with those larger companies, we'll give them typically a good credit rating, because the credit rating's looking at 30 or so factors to assess the risk. But we thought it was good to sort of separate purely sort of payment risk, so you can see, okay, this large entity, yes, it's a low insolvency risk, but it pays pretty late. So I'll talk to some industries. So some good examples of what you might find in that sort of D category for the high turnover businesses. You'll get a lot of larger construction companies sort of float around that sort of 30-day payment, so it can dip into D. That's sort of typical of the industry, but won't necessarily mean a particularly high sort of insolvency risk.
And there's been plenty of discussion in the media, and the previous small business ombudsman, Kate Carnell, spent a lot of time lobbying government to introduce that the small business payment times legislation. You don't have to think too hard about large organizations that pay slowly, but the chance of them becoming insolvent is very low. There's a lot of work being done by those large organizations. So I don't want to sort of tar large organizations as bad payers. They are just often consistently paying at that 30 or 60 days or 90 sometimes, but that that you are going to get paid. However, with some of that work that's been done by the ombudsman, we're starting to see that come down. But I think it's really important to know as a creditor that you are going to get paid by that high turnover business. it's just not going to be necessarily within a week or two.
Yeah, more or less what you see is for a larger business, you can be in that D rating because you've got a savvy CFO who's managing your working capital, minimizing sort of interest payments on bank overdrafts. So that, whereas for a smaller business, if you're sort of a corner shop, sort of, shop front cafe, and you're kind of 30, 60 days late, it's unlikely to be that, and it's more likely to be liquidity issues and you're under genuine stress.
Yeah.
Okay, so next slide. So just to summarize some of those stats. So, for a smaller business, if in that worst credit rating, you're more than 5 times the insolvency risk of a small business that's paying on time. And then sort of at that 30-day mark, that's when we really start to see it's still a sort of a 3-fold risk. And on the next slide, it gives a bit of a just summary of the larger business. So, it's important to point out that, large businesses with really late payment times, they're still double the risk of a large business that's paying on time or within 30 days.
Yeah, great stats to have there. Really important. I might just hammer them home a little bit again. Small business with 60-day arrears are more than 5 times the default risk, right? So that's a really, really key indicator when you're assessing credit. And even at the 7.2% for businesses with 30 to 60 days, they're 3 times the default risk compared to businesses that pay on time. So it's a really powerful tool that can be used, whether it's in an automated fashion or setting your credit policies internally. You can have a fairly standard policy that says anyone that is D or E is a firm reject, or they pay cash up front. Oops, sorry, a little bit too. There we go.
Yeah, that's the next one. So look, the last 2 slides, I've got a bit of a comparison of some locations and industries. So these charts show the percentage of businesses that are assigned that worst rating by the major capital city CBDs. Look, as a Sydney-based business owner, I'm sad to say we come last. So Sydney's basically the worst payers, and a lot of that actually is to do with the rental stress. So CBD, it's interesting when you look at sort of CBD locations, you've got a mix of some of the biggest ASX and even multinationals headquartered there, but mixed in with that, you've got a whole heap of smaller businesses with very high commercial rent prices. So Sydney's kind of at the worst end of the scale. It probably should jump out to you too, the quantum of those numbers. So, the average across all of those data points is about 10%. Now, an important point to highlight here is we're starting to report some of this information more broadly to the market. And what in sort of creating that reporting suite, what we're seeing is that if I filter down to our small businesses, so this chart is produced on our accounting software integration data pool. So it's about half the data, and payments to small business, average of about 10% that are sort of in that E rating. If I look at the same data cut by our other data source, so our larger corporates, so utilities, banks, those numbers roughly cut in half. So it's more like sort of about 5%. So anecdotally and I think intuitively, payments to primary suppliers like banks and your energy provider, they get paid first before your secondary suppliers. So it is quite an interesting finding, and we're going to release some more detail on that in the coming months. So that's sort of the location view. If we look at industry on the next slide.
Just to double down again there, where that becomes really important, of course, is that CreditorWatch has customers of all sizes, from sole traders all the way up to large organizations. So you really are getting that 360-degree view to understand, how are they paying small, medium, and large organizations rather than just large organizations. You get a true sense of what their payment rhythms are like, but also when they start to pay smaller or medium-sized suppliers, that is, other CreditorWatch customers, we start to capture important delinquency information that will come through in alerts and/or you will see in reports from a default perspective and/or changes in the payment rating.
Yeah, that's correct. So on the industry side, just a bit of a look at industry. The as I sort of mentioned earlier, sort of construction industry, sort of the later payments, followed closely by essentially the hospitality industry. Construction's a bit of an interesting case because there's a lot of project finance. So construction is quite interesting in that it's the worst payer in some sense, but if you look at its insolvency risk for that industry, it's pretty much bang on the average across all industries. So a bank loan to a construction company is about the average risk, all things being equal, but the payment times tend to be a bit slower. At the other end of the scale, sort of the best payers tend to be sort of healthcare, public admin and government, and agribusiness are actually quite good. But again, sort of that average across those is about sort of 10%, with, the construction and your kind of small cafes and pubs and that sort of accommodation being the sort of slowest payers.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see whether there are any changes, particularly with the Greater Sydney lockdowns that are happening right now over the next few months. All right.
Okay, so that was basically it. I'm happy to open it up to any questions.
Let me just get my mouse here and see if there are any questions that have come through. Just a question on the capital city performance. Does it take into account the number of businesses in the city or businesses as a whole for all of the cities?
It does, in the sense that we report these numbers when we've got large enough pools to report them. So those numbers will be an average across all businesses located in those regions. So it's basically an average within that region. And in general, for both industry and capital city, we'll only sort of report where we've got, sort of thousands of businesses in each of those groups.
Yeah. Great question here from Johnny. Do you alert on payment rating changes? Yes, we do. That is actually a new feature that is, if it hasn't just gone live, it's about to go live. So if you're monitoring your customers, as all of our CreditorWatch users do, if a payment rating changes, right? So if it goes from a C to a D, for example, or worse, a C to an E, we'll send you an email alert to flag that with you. So really powerful tool, really powerful alert to use. To put that into real practical sense, obviously we upload your customer list into your CreditorWatch account and you receive alerts on those customers that you're monitoring. You might perform a search on a new business that applies for an account with you. They've got a good credit rating, they've got a good payment rating, no adverse information like defaults or court actions against them. However, down the track, whether it's weeks or months or years, they run into difficulty. The first sort of alert from a coming delinquency perspective will be that payment rating alert. So you'll be able to see that they've gone from a B to a C or C to a D or whatnot, and that's a really important flag to say, hey, assess how you're going to deal with these guys. Do you want to continue to offer them credit? Do you want to reduce their credit limit? Do you want to move them onto COD, for example? And what we would then see thereafter, provided it's not just a blip, we would likely start to see payment defaults, court actions, and ultimately administration come through over the coming 6 to 12 months as well. So good question from Johnny. A question about the Xero and MYOB data. So that data is provided by our customers who integrate with their CreditorWatch account. So they are providing that as part of the normal T's and C's that any sort of MYOB or Xero add-on provider has access to. Question about turnover. What dollar turnover is categorized to medium-sized business and dollar turnover categorized as large turnover? So I guess the question there, how are you splitting those two categories?
For that chart, we have some proxy information using actually a few data sources. So it isn't a clean X dollar turnover. What we use is our, well, first of all, we've got ATO tax reporting data. So every sort of 100 mil turnover plus business is in that category. We also use, in a more nuanced way, our transactional data. Now, that's not the direct balance sheet turnover, but we can see big businesses that have a big trade footprint based on the turnover we can see in our data and the number of suppliers they're interacting with. And then we've got a few other conditions. So if you've got a whole board of directors, if you've got sort of 5+ directors, so it's a bit of a proxy size measure. More or less, it'll capture every business over 100 mil turnover, and it'll capture most businesses sort of between that 50 to 100. So you can sort of think of that category as a proxy for, say, roughly speaking, a 50 mil turnover type split.
Thank you. Question here, can I run a report on my customer list based on payment ratings? Yes, you can. You'll need to get in contact with us, so you can. I'll share some contact details after, or if not, go to your account manager or use the live chat. There's plenty of different ways, and we can run a portfolio health check and include the payment ratings against your whole customer portfolio. There's also another tool called DebtorLogic that you could utilize as well, which provides that on an ongoing basis as well. Sorry, just going through these. A couple of these questions have already been answered, which is good. Is that possible to generate a credit report of payment rating E companies? So if a company does have an E rating and you run a credit report on them, and I'll do a bit of a demonstration to show you what those reports look like and where the payment rating is, and show you a live version of that. Yep, that's certainly possible. How do we integrate CreditorWatch with Xero? Another very good question that I will get in contact with you, but you should be able to contact live chat. They can give you the link. I believe it is creditorwatch.com.au/Xero. However, I will come back to you with the exact details there. Question here, what is the failure rate by industry? I don't have that particular slide within this. However, we are doing our, yeah, we've got that data, and we share that in our business risk review, which will be next week. Michael, I'll be able to send you, I can send you the June results, or if you can hang out for a week, we'll have the failure rate by industry, or we call it probability of default by industry, in the business risk review webinar next week. So I will come back to you on that one. Question here, good question. Are payment terms taken into account? Yes. So
yes,
we're standardizing it, and we talk about arrears. So regardless of whether the payment terms are 7, 14, 30, 60, we're talking about past due in arrears. A couple more questions around that. There's so many questions today, which is great because we don't always get a huge amount. Is it possible to have the capital city forecast extrapolated to major suburbs within the city and not just the CBD? Very good question. We have James started to touch on some additional reports and graphs and insights that we'll be sharing in the coming months. In particular, one of those we'll look at almost LGA level. Is that right, James? What's the best way to sort of put it into?
Yeah, we're actually going to report
as a layman.
Yeah, we're going to report a number of statistics at a regional level. It's called the statistical aggregate 3, but it's basically there's about 300 odd regions sort of cut across the country. So fairly granular. Yeah, obviously much more granular than just CBDs. So yes, in September we'll be releasing a whole host of new reporting in that space.
Yeah, that'll be really powerful to have a look at specific areas. All right, that's sort of taking us to all of the questions. There's a couple of others that I've sort of skipped over, but we will get back to you on that. I'm obviously conscious of time, but also of keeping right on track around the payment rating question. So what I wanted to do now was jump into CreditorWatch and show what this looks like from a credit reporting perspective. James, just confirm that you can see CreditorWatch there.
Yes.
Great. So CreditorWatch credit report, of course, we can see, for those of you who do use it, you'll be familiar with that. For those who aren't, I'm not going to do a full demonstration today, but this is the risk score, the risk rating, the credit rating, and then you can see the tab here, very easy to get to. Payment data takes you through to our payment rating. In this case, this entity is an A payer, A rating, which is really positive. We also have information on the industry as well. So the industry that they operate in is a B rating. And if we scroll down, we can see, entity pays on average 1 day overdue. The industry is 7 days overdue. We can see a 12-month historical trend there as well, which is really powerful. So they're very consistent payer, which is great. And the statistics are really beneficial here as well. 38 trade lines making up this particular entity, which is a huge amount of data to utilize and see how they are paying on a regular basis. In this case, we can see a C rating for the particular entity that we're looking at, 12 days overdue, but that's come down significantly over the last 12 months, which is great to see, from an E rating at about 67 days overdue all the way down to where we find ourselves today, 12. And in that case, there wasn't an industry. And the last one I wanted to show here was a D rating for the entity, but a B rating for the industry. So again, just a nice way to sort of visualize exactly how this particular entity is paying their bills. They are slow. They are fairly consistently slow. There's obviously been a bit of an increase from 40 days up to high and mid 50s, and that's then come back down in the last couple of months as well. Plenty of data coming through to support that from a statistics perspective. So hopefully that's giving you a better understanding of where that information is coming from, and that sits just below the risk score or the credit rating that we provide as well. So a good one to look at here, a larger organization, they've got a really acceptable credit rating of a C2 and have been quite consistent over the last 12 months. They've actually come up from a D1, which is great to see. C2, of course, sort of sitting within that average from a credit rating perspective, and then we have the D payment rating. So really good to see how those two work in unison together. Just jumping back in here before we wrap up. So live demo, we've obviously done. James, I'm just going to run a quick poll as well. This is for everyone within the who's signed in today. Would you like to be contacted by a staff member? This is a really good way for us to sort of prioritize who to get in contact with straight away. Don't be afraid to put no down. If you put yes, it just means that we're not sort of going through the whole attendee list to work out who does want to get contacted. James, were there any sort of additional comments that you wanted to add in there?
No, yeah, like I said at the outset, we hope this one is quite always looking at sort of credit scores, which can be quite complicated, but this one hopefully is quite a straightforward and intuitive measure of payment risk.
Yeah, that's right. And just having, those five ratings makes it extremely simple. A, B, C being the much more safer ones to deal with. And of course, there's a clear distinction, but once you hit to D and E, which I think is really important. If you've got, teams, you can obviously set, D and E as a hard reject, and potentially, for C's, you want a manager involved in the decision-making process, and it could be a refer using that sort of terminology. So thank you to everyone who voted there. James, you just wanted, the last thing I will ask as well is the review of this rating. How does that work from your perspective on an ongoing basis, I should say?
The review, you mean sort of monitoring, or?
Yeah, in terms of reviewing the models and assessing the data and.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, this rating system and the risk score credit ratings as well, we review them basically on a monthly basis. So we're continually tracking the the performance of the rating system is obviously a predictive model, so we're monitoring things like its discrimination over time. The rating system, we've got continuous data QC, sort of, you know, a big team of data scientists always looking and sort of kicking the tires on the data, and that, yeah, so it's very closely monitored on a monthly basis.
Yes, fantastic. So that's really important to note there, that it's always being looked at. And it is, you know, we've had questions, is it COVID specific? Do you have a COVID specific one? The fact is, it is live. It is being reviewed on a monthly basis. So it certainly does take into consideration everything, and the same for the risk score as well, the risk rating. Everything that is taking place at the moment is certainly filtering into these ratings and scores. Because, you know, we're seeing things change on such a quick basis. The country was doing so well up until sort of mid-June, and very quickly we've seen how fast the situation can change, and obviously, you know, thoughts with everyone who's either locked down or is hopefully not too many people is unwell with COVID. Hang in there. We know that Australia bounced back very, very quickly from you know, what I would call COVID 1.0, you know, particularly Victoria. We haven't seen, you know, this influx of additional administrations out of Victoria, despite the extended lockdown they were in and the ongoing lockdowns they've experienced over the last 16 months. No doubt it is extremely tough out there for a lot of businesses and a lot of employees and a lot of business owners. But we've seen the resilience and strength of the Australian economy, and we're starting off a really high base up until, you know, we went into this most recent lockdown. So please do hang in there. Don't be shy to contact us as well if you need any advice. We've got plenty of organisations that can assist, be it, you know, with accounting and solvency, restructuring, or just if you wanted to reassess your credit reporting policies. So that takes us to the end today. I just wanted to say thank you very much for joining us. Always great to have you all sign in, take the time to join CreditorWatch for our webinars. And James, as always, pleasure to have you on board. You provide so much fantastic insight for us and have done a fantastic job. So kudos to you and your team as well.
Yep, thank you.
All right, everyone, that takes us to the end. So thanks again. It's been great having you. This, of course, is recorded. We'll send the slides out, and the recording will be available soon. Keep an eye out for the business risk review, which will be coming up. I believe it is next week, if not the week after. We'll have plenty of new stats in there. And then, of course, in September, we've got some really, really juicy and sexy insights and data that will be coming through, looking at, you know, sort of almost local government area, payment times, looking at how small businesses are paying their bills or being paid versus large organizations as well, starting to split that out so you can really get a feel for the difference in being a what we call a critical supplier or a non-critical supplier. That is it from me today. Thanks very much. Stay safe, and we'll see you very soon.